Chapter 17. Delayed. Back at the village, the men said goodbye to the boys after thanking them once more. "Is it all right if we leave now?" asked Tom. The detective nodded. "I have no objections. I understand you fellows plan to head straight for home. We have your names and addresses. We'll transfer the prisoners to the city where they'll eventually be tried. But that won't be for a while. Maybe you boys will have to appear as witnesses. Then you'll receive a summons." When the men had left, Tom sighed. "That's over and done with. Now I want to buy a few things in town, and then I propose we leave as quickly as we can. We can get a long ways before dark." "Fine with me," answered Carl. "Why don't you two go into town to do your errands? I'll stay here and change the name of our boat back to the Kingfisher." Tom, Bert, and Scout set out for town. They had made a list of supplies and had to go to different stores to buy them all. They returned to the boat some time later. As they neared the boat, they saw that Carl had removed the plate that had covered the old name of the boat and uncovered the picture of the Kingfisher. Carl was standing on deck, but he looked dejected. "Something wrong?" asked Bert. Carl nodded. "The policeman from the village just stopped by," he said. "He came to tell us that we can't leave yet." "But those officers told us that we were free to go whenever we wished," cried Bert, puzzled. "Yes, that's what I told him. But then he put on a mysterious air and said we should wait just one more day. Tomorrow we could do as we pleased. More than that he wouldn't say." "Great!" exploded Tom. "We should have left without going into town first. Then he would have missed us." The others agreed, but it was too late to do anything about it. Slowly dusk descended on the village. The setting sun threw a trail of golden light across the lake, and the world seemed at peace. But the boys had no eye for the beauty of the evening. Their cheerful mood had been destroyed by the policeman's puzzling message. Suddenly they heard a car horn. They looked up and saw a station wagon heading toward their boat. "Why, that's our car!" exclaimed Tom. The car stopped, and out stepped Tom's parents, his two sisters, Carl's father, and the policeman. The boys gaped in surprise. Smiling and laughing, the visitors hurried toward the three young travelers and greeted them enthusiastically. "How did you get here so quickly?" asked Carl, still dazed. His father laughed. "I could ask you the same question. The Kingfisher has strayed a long way from its main route." Carl blushed, but the policeman, who was standing to one side, spoke up. "Remember I took down your names and addresses yesterday?" he reminded Carl. "After that I immediately called Tom's folks. They told me they would be here late this evening. That's why I told you not to leave this afternoon. Otherwise they would have missed you." "We got quite a scare yesterday when this officer called," said Mr. Sanders, "but we just had a long talk with him. Today his opinion of you boys is much higher than it was yesterday. But you should have written home and told us about the troubles you were in. It would have saved you a lot of headaches and difficulties." The boys nodded guiltily. They saw, however, that Tom's father and Mr. Van Doren were not really angry. "Bert, your parents send you their love," Mr. Sanders went on. "They were too busy on the farm to come along, so we brought Ina and Miriam. Besides, they begged to come. But come on, let's go into the cabin. Then you boys can tell us exactly what happened. Those 2 notes and postcards that we received from you didn't tell us much. You left out a lot more than you told us." The policeman said goodbye, and everyone else filed into the cabin. Tom began to tell the story, and Carl and Bert joined in. The visitors listened attentively. The girls especially shuddered when they heard of the dangerous situations the boys had been in. It was dark by the time they finished telling the story. "We can be thankful that God graciously saved you, boys," said Mr. Sanders. "You acted bravely through it all, but you also did some dumb things. Thank God everything turned out all right." By this time, it was so late that the guests had to say good night. With the help of the policeman, they found lodgings in the village. The next morning they were up early. They took a dip in the clear, cool water of the lake, dressed, and were just sitting down to breakfast when the others came driving up. "Well," said Mrs. Sanders when she saw the huge breakfast spread out on the table, "I can see you boys didn't starve despite all your troubles. The vacation seems to have done you good. You all look as tanned and tough as sailors." "Carl has been doing his best to fatten us. He has missed his calling. He should become a chef on an ocean liner," said Bert. Carl grinned. "Remember that first dropped egg that I fried? You should have seen their faces." Amid much laughter, he described his less than inspiring debut as a ship's cook. After breakfast, they took their guests for a sail in the Kingfisher. They sailed to the other end of the lake and pointed out the place where they had waited to trap the gang. By now, the boys had learned to know their way about the woods and found the hollow tree and the shack without too much trouble. Everyone had to take a look in the underground hideout. By the time they returned to the sailboat, most of the morning was gone. The boys invited everyone to stay for lunch aboard the Kingfisher. After lunch, they sailed back to the village and said so long to their 5 visitors. It would take the boys another 2 days to sail the yacht back home. The trip through the narrow canal went much easier than they had feared. The water seemed to be a little higher this time. They did have to push floating logs away from the boat several times with their boat pole, and the thick weeds gave them some trouble, but they knew how to handle their boat by now. The Kingfisher arrived home late one afternoon, and the boys anchored at the spot from which they had left more than 2 weeks ago. Carl's family was just sitting down for supper, and Tom and Bert joined them. After dinner, they had to tell their stories about their trip. "Did you hear anything about Jason and that gang of young crooks?" asked Mr. Van Doren. Carl shook his head. "We haven't heard a thing, but the police would have had trouble finding us if they had wanted to contact us." "Well, then I know more than you fellows," answered Van Doren. From his pocket, he pulled a folded newspaper. He pointed to a caption over 2 columns on the front page. The 3 boys eagerly read the article. "Long-sought burglar finally captured. Jewels recovered," they read. It was a good article, although the reporter had filled in with his imagination whatever he didn't know. The result was a sensational story about 3 boys who had discovered the burglar's hideout in the woods and overpowered him in a dangerous fight. The boys had a laugh over that, but then they noticed the last paragraph. It said that Jason and the gang had admitted everything. The arrest had cleared up several unsolved burglaries and led to several other arrests. It was time for Tom and Bert to say goodnight. They thanked Mr. Van Doren heartily for the use of the boat. When he jokingly asked them if they wanted to go out again next summer, they all shouted eagerly, "You bet!" It was such an enthusiastic chorus that Scout too joined in, excitedly barking his agreement.